I think that on behalf of all of you, I really could thank all the contributors, be they from the panel or from the floor, for giving us a lot of food for thought and building the basis, a broader basis for our discourse. I was asked to give a summary, but every one of you does his or her own summary, meaning contextualizing what you have heard into what you have known before. And since I'm going to talk about context, this is very dear to me. And so I'm not a special person in drawing the conclusions for all of you. And I even will start my summary with the end of the discussion we heard right now. And first of all, answer some very specific question about the Ombudsperson. The Ombudsperson for the environment is perhaps discussed in some countries, but the Ombudsperson or the High Commissioner for Future Generations is very high up on the agenda for the Rio+20 summit right now, supported by 8 of the 9 major groups, meaning all the people except for business, youth, women, farmers, labor, indigenous peoples, scientists, etc. Only business couldn't support it. So anyway, there is news, and I'll come back to that. Also, prevention and the precautionary principle are products of the Rio conference 20 years ago and are quite clearly defined. And if you need to look it up, you can look it up at the International Environmental Compact elaborated by the IUCN Environmental Law Center on the website, and it gives you very good formulations also for the scientists, but for the lawyers anyway, on and definitions on these issues. And but on the precautionary principle, there is a huge fight about it, because basically the US and the WTO and Canada, of course, take something that they call the science-based approach to decision making. This has nothing to do with the fact that they want science and we don't want science. It is not equivalent to making use of the best available science, which we hopefully should all do. But it means that governments are not allowed to act until the causal chain has been scientifically established and there is scientific consensus. Now, my guess is, in the best of worlds, this will take 15 years, meaning half a generation on all the issues, whilst the precautionary principle says if there is scientific uncertainty, but there are indications of severe and or irreversible harm, decision makers should act. And that means governments should act, and they have a reason to look very closely and assess the risks and do safety research, risk research, safety research. Whilst if you have the science-based approach, strangely enough, it pays financially not to look, because then you can postpone the situation where you would have to act, where the causal chain has been established. So the precautionary principle, funnily enough, gives a greater incentive for risk research and safety research than the science-based approach as a legal approach poses. And I think throughout our discussions we are addressing this political dilemma. And also, unfortunately, David G. is not here, who demonstrates the dilemma now in the second edition of the Late Lessons from Early Warnings, how you act on these warnings or you don't act, whether you look or you don't look. So, and on the issue of horizontal and vertical, I'm a stickler for scientific detail, so I never would mix up the areas, but we need both. If we want a safety hammock, we need a strong weaving of the horizontal and the vertical conversation. And that's perhaps one of the tasks that Hartmut asked me to identify. So now I try to be a little bit less unconventional and address the sequence of the speakers. Angelika Hilbeck talked about linking the dots and about discreditation, and also the huge obstacles to interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary research. There are, however, very recent meetings when it's shown that this is the type of research that the most recently established panels will use. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, after a long debate, day and night for 6 days, called its panel MEP, Multidisciplinary Expert Panel, explicitly including other knowledge systems, be they traditional indigenous and local people knowledge, be they consumer observations, or whatever it is. So this is a newly established science panel. Also, the same 8 major groups, with the exception of business, are pressing for an Office for Technology Assessment, which is regionally balanced, multidisciplinary, including all systems of knowledge, very high up in the UN system. So we are not having to find places artificially. Where do we address nanotech, which is not a national problem? Where do we, and it's not a European problem, it's in a global market, it is always a global problem. Where do we go and have a good assessment of the risks of synthetic biology? Where do we go if we want to assess the risks of geoengineering and whatever comes up? We can't lose 10 years in order to find a place where to discuss upcoming technologies. So that would be one of the solutions, and that also shows that the approach, the multidisciplinary approach, is the most modern approach and not the oblique approach of some people who don't know to do disciplinary science properly. Hartmut, in his introduction, mentioned that human rights discussion should be included. Unfortunately, we couldn't do so. These 2 scientific panels, which changed into expert panels from the very start, want to include human rights issues. Ana Carolina Herrero pointed to one of the paradoxes of the debates on Argentina, because non-tillage was very early a demand of conserving soil, of protecting soil from erosion, and it was sort of hijacked by the GM debate, the GM plus herbicide debate. And as rightly was pointed out in all of our debates, the question, when you see how the pictures change, how humans change the surface of the earth. We can change, but it doesn't mean that it has to go in the same trend and the same direction all the time. So it also could mean that you could change the surface in a different manner. And the relevant question to that was posed by David Quist. What kind of agriculture do we want? And only by moving from the technology-centered debate, gene tech, agricultural seeds or not, and gene tech products or not, to what kind of agriculture do we need, then of course it's not a question of a few experts in their field, but of the wide expertise addressing and describing agricultural systems. One of the very difficult parts we're still addressing when new research is coming in is that it's not only deforestation, but it's actually plowing the pampa that may produce more CO2 emissions than cutting down primary forest, because these old grasslands have such a high humus content, and it goes once the surface is broken. So, and we haven't mentioned yet, with countries specializing in oilseeds, that we use a lot and abuse a lot of the fertile land on this soil with humus, soil with natural rainfall, like the Rio de la Plata basin, for feeding our pigs, cows, and cars. Because our pigs, cows, and cars have more buying power than most poor people on the earth. So again, a question of addressing the whole problem of agriculture and agricultural policies. Now I come to Andrés Carrasco, and of course looking at Paraquat in time again, because we have looked at Paraquat earlier. When it's upcoming again would be a very good task for such a technology assessment office. But I was fascinated by your epistemological questions. It's quite clear that the task of identifying genes and getting them out of their context into a test tube or an internet published sequence is, although it gets Nobel Prizes, a very simple task compared to the task of recontextualizing this sequence into another context, meaning into a genome. Already that has the problems. It has the problems as if you took your favorite words. Perhaps with some scientists it may be innovation and peer-reviewed publication. And then you take your favorite poem, be it a Shakespeare sonnet, and you throw 20 copies on the sonnet. And the question is, what is the chances to really get a better poem? And that's about it. It might simply destroy the rhyme and rhythm. It might replace essential words that are also important in life. So it's about that. But that is only about the contextualization in the genome. Then you have the context in the landscape of the development of an organism. And then you have the context in the ecosystem. And then you have the socioeconomic context. So if this very admired task of identifying certain portions of the genome that make sense, which gives Nobel Prizes, maybe less than 1 promille of the whole task. And if you look at the financing of the task, this 1 promille gets it all, and the safety research, the contextualization research, gets very little, if anything at all. So we have an imbalance there that is serious, and that also probably will be in other issues, on other issues. I now come to Nicolas Defarge, and again, we have a lot of work on endocrine disruptors already, but nothing much happened in our agricultural systems to really apply the knowledge and to enforce it. So we have a difficulty there. And then you mentioned that you had to get industry data by a court case, by law. And that, of course, again links to other contexts. And that means that you have in Europe and in Western Eastern Europe, Central Asia, you have the Aarhus Convention, which is an implementation of the Principle 10 of Rio. And the Principle 10 basically says timely information, effective participation, and affordable access to justice. And and let me tell you, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, they knew about it before any Western Europeans talked about it and said, this is our replacement for the French Revolution, because this is when citizens can win against the authorities of the state, even in our region, which we couldn't before. So the confidentiality of data is very clearly defined in the Aarhus Convention, and everything that concerns environmental and human health damage cannot be kept confidential under the Aarhus Convention. So if you know about the Aarhus Convention, you can clearly go for it and say, there are indications that human health or environment are addressed or attacked or damaged or risked. Then you can get the information, or the company has to withdraw their application. That is the other possibility. And of course, Nicolas, you stressed independent evaluation. Now, none of us is independent, but there should be a clear statement of that there is no conflict of interest. And so in some areas of the debates between science, public policy, and the courts, it is as if a few researchers with an interest could do Montesquieu with the separation of powers, because the same researchers define what research should be promoted, because they are the best. They define what is the correct research, and they advise courts of justice, because they are the best. So there is a lowering of the standard of the separation of powers. And in a way, you also in that field, and this is quite closely linked to Nicolas' thing, that the precautionary principle is competing with something else, and that is the multilateral or bilateral agreements on investment. And that is a real inversion of the burden of proof, because no new scientific findings and no new government regulation are allowed to interfere with the profit expectations of investors. You think it's absurd, but there is a very famous case in Canada where a certain additive to fuel of the methyl company was proven to cause cancer. The Canadian government quite naively said, well, then we ban it. They passed legislation to ban it. And then, because of NAFTA, which is includes a trilateral agreement on investment, they were told, yes, you can do that, but you have to pay the investor every bit of money every year that they expected to earn. And then Canada withdrew its legislation because they couldn't afford it. So if you do critical research, you're meddling in major affairs of the world. And I know that Nicola and his group around Gilles-Éric Serralini are meddling in major affairs. This happens. So I was absolutely delighted to listen to Simon, because you, by addressing the practical issues to protect the citizens, all of a sudden you have all these balls that you have to juggle. And I wish very much that you continue to juggle them successfully on short and long-term effects, mortality, morbidity, and what I liked most, because you were the person to first introduce it, robust enforcement. Henry Dahl, I am absolutely delighted about the International Litigation Act and the victims, and this is the contrary what if you want to make the polluter pay, which is another principle of Rio, you really have to work hard to do it. The victims always pay automatically. So if you want to have the poor victims suffer and pay, you don't have to do anything. If you want the polluter to have to pay, and more importantly even perhaps, because that has a precautionary touch to it, if you want the polluter to include the risk of the litigation costs when they take their decisions, if you want the polluter to take insurance because they are aware of the costs of litigation, then the insurance companies who have a business interest in the correct assessment of the risk will be involved, and the polluter may not go into very risky branches of business. And if you look at the insurance of Lloyd's and Swiss Re and Bavaria Re, they all don't insure GE risks, and they don't want to in the future. So I also very much like the idea of the Court of Public Opinion cooperating with legislators, but unfortunately others already have seen that this would be a very powerful combination and tool. In Brazil, the Congress, not the government, the Congress was influenced by agro-industry, as all Brazilians tell me, not only the critical NGOs, but also government delegates. It's against the will of the government that Congress decided to undo its forest legislation, protecting the Amazon to a degree, and also may remove the ban on the terminated technology by Congress, although the government is party to the Cartagena Protocol, still, which and the Convention on Biological Diversity, which basically put a moratorium on the terminator, still the Congress. So all of a sudden the alliance, the potential alliance between citizens, their parliaments and their legislation is broken by new attempts of the agri-industry sector. So, and then I come to David. I was not aware that I share some of the training because I also had done evolution theory and molecular biology, and that may lead to certain similar lines of thinking, like moving from a technology-centered debate, risks and benefits of whatever, to a problem-oriented debate. What type of agriculture do we want? Also, again, focusing on the precautionary principle and on the importance of risk assessment and independent risk assessment. Irina Rodriguez added something very important, but which is difficult for scientists. Listen to the research results and act upon it. The moment a scientist acts upon it, he's called unscientific. If a scientist learns from what he found, he is called unscientific, as if the learning from what you found removes the independence and the unbiased eye. And I think there we can learn from Niels Bohr, who clearly said, no one can describe the full reality of an object. It always depends on the aspects and on the point of where you are in reality of what you will see. So we are in difficulties as scientists, because we are always, if we act upon what we see and what we found, what we discussed, what we peer-reviewed, what we criticized amongst each other, but then the learning step is somehow not allowed. And that learning step is something where, in a way, we have to reinvent enlightenment, where scientists and citizens did a joint emancipation. And perhaps that is also one of the tasks. And then there was the very interesting question, when do we look at certain branches of science? We had a long time for debate and had a long time to look in earlier times. But now universities have changed their character since the 60s, huge changes. We have public-private partnerships on which all university relies for fundings. And universities are seen as major national assets in global competition. And even if you say we have a long time to look at synthetic biology, I know the numbers of the big money already invested from oil companies, which will press them to go to the market, even if it's these algae tanks or whatever. So the lag phase for looking at science is definitely shorter than in earlier times. We are also pushed by the time limits of patent protection. So we really have to place ourselves, do what we're good at, but look at the countryside in which we are acting. Thank you.